Yeah. We'll call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Representative Alleman. Representative Allred.
Here.
Representative Banks.
Here.
Representative Conrad.
Here.
Representative Crago.
Excuse.
Representative Davis.
Here.
Representative Slagle.
Present.
Representative Winter.
Here.
Chairman Eklund.
Here.
Thank you.
Representative Crago will be back. He's, I think, presenting a bill somewhere. So our first bill for consideration is Senate File 28. And we have a person who served on this committee and knows a little bit about this bill and why we need it. So Representative Larson, when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. This bill comes to you from Tribal Relations, and the good chairman remembers that last year this bill came through and was passed by this committee. We run out of time the last day. It was the next bill up when we shut the doors and shut the lights last year, and so bringing it back, and for the new members of the committee, this is, I'll explain why Tribal Relations is bringing this bill, and it's really dealing with infectious disease for livestock. We had, in Tribal Relations, had been working with Director True and state veterinarians for the last probably 6 years in Tribal Relations, trying to figure out a way to approach to where we could further ensure testing on the reservation for our livestock herds and preventing the state's position on brucellosis as well as other infectious diseases. That what's important for this group, for this committee to remember, is that the geographic boundaries of the Wind River Reservation really are under the sovereignty of the tribes. And so when you consider the impact of wildlife or do any testing of wildlife, which our Game and Fish does around the rest of the state, they have control of that testing on the reservation, and it's done with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And so the tribe has maintained that the Wind River Reservation is brucellosis free, as well as others, based on the testing that they've done. We have approached over a couple of years and said, well, could we help do further testing? They said, thank you. And we respect that, but we're doing fine. Director True, I guess it was last year, that the tribes come and says, well, what if livestock producers on the reservation wanted to participate in state programs where, if livestock have brucellosis or other infected diseases, that would they be able to? And so we worked with them through the interim, worked with the tribes and worked with the governor's office and with the Director True, and that's where this bill comes in. So bearing in mind that for the most part that you've got this geographic area in there, that the two tribes, those governing entities, have control of what takes place in there. But they're saying, in this bill, but if you, as a livestock producer within that geographic bounds, wants to participate of your own fruition with this program, that's fine, do it. And so this bill says now that they would be eligible if they're on the reservation. So we're saying any livestock producer, even on the reservation, is eligible if they will comply or agree to participate in the programs, whether that's brucellosis or tuberculosis or whatever that is. And it kind of leaves the two tribes separate. They're saying you can't, you're not going to state, you can't come in here and tell us as a tribal entity how to test wildlife or make any determination. But certainly if these people want, of their own free will, want to participate in this program, not a problem. However, there is also a provision in there that they like, that Director True come up with, that says, but we could, if there comes a point that we could enter into an MOU with the tribes to have a collaborative relationship on testing wildlife or other things, but it provides that ability to enter into an MOU without having to come back to us or do anything else. It would be in place, and so then the state veterinarian or livestock board, whomever, could enter into that. So that's really what this bill does. And so then we make it to where they can, on page 1 is new language, or excuse me, page 2 is new language, where it says that that the state veterinarian can provide these services, including the Wind River Reservation, to those who agree to comply with the applicable program requirements. Okay. And then it comes down at the bottom and it says that services on the Wind River Reservation of this subsection may also be provided pursuant to a cooperative agreement between the Wyoming Livestock Board and the tribes. So that's the two components. If there's not an MOU with the tribes in place, the individual livestock producers can enter into it of their own free will. And then we go into the statutes where we have infectious disease, and we make conforming language to identify that that producers on the Wind River Reservation can participate in these programs. And in essence, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that's the bill. And we think it's really important as we try and maintain brucellosis-free state or other infectious disease-free state. And there is interest on the for producers to participate. The tribes do support this, and so happy to take any questions.
Committee questions? Representative Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Larson, this is just 100% voluntary to the tribe. Yes, that's what I thought.
Mr. Chairman, 100% voluntary to the producer whose livestock may be on the reservation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And Mr. Chairman, if you would allow me, there's also some criteria. So within the reservation, there are leases, just like BLM leases or state leases, but there's BIA leases to producers. And one of the requirements on those BIA leases is that they comply with state regulations governing that. So that fits in real well as well.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Chairman Larson, that was my question: has there ever been a problem with one of these diseases on the reservation that were not where they were not informed, or they hadn't informed the state? And if they had, did they get the thing taken care of properly, or have they just never had any problem with any of these diseases at all?
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Winter, I'll have to call a friend on that. I'm not aware of any, but I'll ask Director True, our state veterinarian. Maybe they, with your permission, maybe they could join us, Mr. Chairman, and because I think some of these questions.
It's a good idea, Director. And Hazel, come on up, Dr. Hazel. My guess is it sure could be, because we're right up against an area that sees brucellosis, and the wildlife don't seem to notice there's a big mountain range in between that area and them.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to clarify the question, because I think the question was, have we had any domestic livestock? be infected with that, and we'll let them clarify. I don't think so. We've had some elk that's tested positive close around, but I think the question comes back to livestock.
Mr. Chairman, Steve True, Director of the Wyoming Livestock Board, Representative Winter, and this would be historical from Dr. Logan. Back in the early 2000s, there was a brucellosis reactor on the reservation. That producer complied well with what was required at that time. That's all that I'm aware of. As Chairman Larson just mentioned, 2019, 3 seropositive cow elk were determined as part of a conjoined study between UW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and Game and Fish on mule deer. But at the same time, they collared 75 elk, I believe, at that time, and came up with 3 seropositive, one of which her migration pattern had her reasonably close to some of the meadows up in the Crowheart area. At this time, all 3 of those elk are deceased, so they're no longer an issue. But that was something that piqued a lot of our interest and kind of started some of this conversation as well.
Other questions, committee? Alan, Representative Slagle, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One question I have is going back to, on page 2, line 6, it says, talking about what the state veterinarian's going to do, and it talks about reimbursement. And I was just curious what that might include. I mean, I know the fiscal impact says it's indeterminable at this time. And so I was just curious what this reimbursement might all include.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Slagle, this is really the basis, one of the key components of the bill, because there are some programs that existed that are available to livestock producers in how they handle livestock who test positive and the disposition of them that were not available to producers on the reservation. This bill will then, to your point, make them eligible for those programs. And I think my friends here to my right can better explain how those programs work and what it takes to be eligible.
Dr. Hazel, when you're ready, go ahead.
Chairman Eklund, Representative Slagle, and in answer to your question about the reimbursement, whenever we have a producer that is diagnosed with a program disease, meaning brucellosis, tuberculosis, those things that are reimbursable by the state government or federal government, there is a reimbursement process that allows us to purchase those animals at cull value on the day that the disease is diagnosed at the laboratory. Currently, all of our Wyoming producers are eligible for that reimbursement. For disease purposes, we consider tribal members to be members of Wyoming just like any other producer. But unfortunately, they're not currently eligible, as Larson said, they're not currently eligible for reimbursement because they're not considered members of the state of Wyoming. And this bill will allow them to apply for that reimbursement at cull value, just like the producers in our state.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
can,
Director.
and just for maybe some of the new members of the committee, that reimbursement statute, there is one account that has 2 programs in it. The indemnity program, which would pay for those animals that Dr. Hazel just mentioned at market value. And there is a reimbursement piece of that now for brucellosis mitigation efforts. If a producer is diagnosed with a brucellosis issue and is under quarantine, has to move outside his normal business model to maintain the parameters of the quarantine, there is up to $25,000 one-time reimbursement to offset some of those costs. That's a separate, so there's actually 2 programs within one account. The account was established in 2011, was taken out of the state vet's brucellosis testing program and started this account with that money at $500,000, interest carrying, non-revertible. I think today it's probably about $530,000. We've paid a few reimbursements this year. So, and there also is a rider with that account that says if it reaches a floor of $100,000, there will be no more of the reimbursement mitigation accounts until the account rises above that level again. But that's the reimbursement pieces. There's 2 pieces there. And one more comment I would make to carry from what Dr. Hazel said is any other vets or any other states, regulatory agencies that would find one of those reportable diseases on the reservation, that's a Wyoming problem. Those are Wyoming producers with a Wyoming problem. They're not sovereign with a problem. So that's one of the other parts of this where we appreciate Select Tribal's work in trying to put this together.
Representative Davis.
With that, is there a mirror, what is it, a mirror policy on the reservation that would address this also? Or do you know?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, you go.
There's not a program implemented and used by the tribe through they themselves or through them and any government to have any similar infectious disease program.
So we have some time this morning, and I would like for you, as much as you can, to educate the committee a little on brucellosis. I watched this episode of Yellowstone. It was a great opportunity. I had heard about this show. And when I was done, I've never watched it again. It was such a septic tank of misinformation, and it was surrounded brucellosis. And I thought, they just don't, maybe it was Montana mostly, but they just don't know how we operate in Wyoming. But you can share with us a little bit about the disease, how it works, why it's essential we're on top of it. You shared some of the reimbursement part, which is huge to producers, and maybe a little bit about the wildlife and all of that, if you would, please.
Thank you, Chairman Eklund. So let me start by saying that not every producer has the ability to take their cattle to the 4.6s for Montana anytime they have a brucellosis diagnosis like they do in Yellowstone. But that being said, might easier that way. That being said, brucella is spread by, it's called Brucella abortus, and it is spread typically by abortion, by inhalation of the bacteria through abortion in most cases. But in our primary concern right now in Wyoming and in the GYA states, being Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, is transmission of Brucella abortus from elk, typically elk, to cattle, that interaction that we have. Especially it's concerning whenever we have a severe winter with the amount of snow that we've had currently in western Wyoming. It's an issue that we have when they're commingling. They'll usually, calving season will run anywhere from February through around May. And that is the time of highest risk for our livestock producers because abortions from brucella typically occur in that third trimester. And we also have cattle commingling with elk during that time period, and that's when the transmission occurs. You cannot treat brucellosis, that is untreatable, unfortunately, and it will cause abortion in our livestock. So that can be very devastating for a producer and can affect a large percentage of the herd. Since there isn't a treatment for it, we do have the testing process that whenever we test a herd, we do a test and cull process. We also have a vaccine that we give heifers, and the primary purpose of that vaccine is to prevent abortion. It doesn't necessarily completely stop the disease, but it does prevent abortion, which helps significantly. But back to our testing and cull process. So we'll do in the designated surveillance area in Wyoming, which is the 6 counties, plus or minus 6 counties on the western side. And Idaho and Montana also have a designated surveillance area in their states. But in that area, we require producers to do brucellosis testing whenever they have a change of ownership or whenever they move cattle out of the DSA. Many of them do testing on an annual basis because they understand the risk whenever there is elk present on their property. So that allows them to find any positive animals and quickly have them removed. If we have a positive animal, as we discussed previously, if there is a positive animal, there's a series of tests that we run on that animal. And then we try to go ahead and remove that animal from the herd. But then that herd has required to undergo 3 negative whole herd tests, which takes about a year to complete that testing process. Throughout that year, they're under quarantine. And as Director True mentioned, we also have when they're under quarantine, they have the $25,000 reimbursement they can undergo if necessary, and we pay cull slaughter value for those animals. But they are under quarantine during that time period. It doesn't mean that they can't sell their animals, it just means they have to meet testing protocol in order to do that. think that's a quick summary. I hope I didn't create more questions. I probably did.
Representative Davis.
Dr. Hazel, you did answer one of my questions I had was, do we have the opt-in, opt-out issue with the DSA outside of the tribal lands? And the answer, what I understood from you is no. We don't have an opt-in, opt-out option with the producers outside of the tribal lands. And that's one thing that concerns me if we're within the tribal lands of having the opt-in, opt-out, as you pointed out earlier, that some producers may do it and some producers may choose not to do it. So without that conformity, how are you going to be able to implement the program? I mean, if you've got one producer that's opt-in and you're testing and his neighbor opts out, you can't test. How do you draw that discretionary line across there as to what you're looking at? Does that make sense?
It does. Chairman Eklund, Representative Davis. Let me clarify your question just a little bit, if I might try. So we have the designated surveillance area of Wyoming. The tribal lands are not part of the designated surveillance area. So they are excluded from required testing. If we were to be testing on the reservation, which I think is what you're asking, am I correct? Testing on the reservation. If we're testing on the reservation, both the state of Wyoming and USDA have a role in that testing that is required. Whenever there is a producer that may turn up positive for brucellosis, we automatically typically test the fence line context, which would be the neighbor. If the neighbor chooses to opt out because they're on the reservation, that's where both us and USDA come in and say, okay, that's fine, you can opt out, but you cannot market your cattle in our marketing channels because they're too high of a risk. So they can opt out, but then they face the consequences of doing that, like any other producer would in any state in the United States. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, that answers my, about consistency about the whole program. So if there is like you said, a hot or a positive sample, then you do test whether they want to or not, whether they're opt into the program or not.
In most cases, yes, that does vary. Dr. Schuh, do you have a comment?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I might tail off of that a little bit, this will basically set the tribal producers up the same as Representative Slagle, somebody that's a producer not in the designated surveillance area. This will be the same type of parameters, which is the language about it including members of the reservation, because people not in the DSA are not under those requirements for change of same kind of testing protocols as folks within the DSA. And it should be mentioned that, and the tribal folks agreed to this and understand this, that these are not grant programs or not programs. If you've availed yourself of these indemnity or reimbursement programs, you've got a problem. And they're aware of that. And these are ways to help you mitigate that problem. And so that needs to be known as well by the committee, but that's part of the discussion we've had at the tribal committee meetings a couple times. And everybody's aware of that fact, that this isn't just a program. These are mitigations for an issue you may be suffering through today. And at the same time, their producers, we've had many conversations with their producer groups out there, that they understand that if they can affect Wyoming's brucellosis-free status, just as Representative Slagle's area, a producer in that area could. So it's an all-in or all game for all of us, because the other states look at us all as Wyoming. So it's a way to protect all of our abilities to market equally, tribal areas and or DSA and or the rest of Wyoming. So I think this touches on all that a little bit.
Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, thank you. I guess to Dr. Hazel, education question. As we look at the overall issue with brucellosis, and we've talked about livestock, we've generally talked about cattle. Can you tell me or give me a better perspective? Is this a larger issue in cattle than it is domestic sheep or sheep producers, et cetera? I do know in the southwest corner there is conversation surrounding brucellosis, and obviously sheep that are native to this area. Is our threat largest in the cattle area, or is it consistent, I guess, per 100 with sheep as well?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Conrad. To answer your question, sheep have Brucella ovis, which is a little different than Brucella abortus that the elk and the cattle carry. We typically don't have a tremendous number of sheep in our designated surveillance area, and it is a different bacteria that we deal with. It is not as prevalent in sheep, being Brucella ovis. We do have issues in Wyoming with Brucella ovis, yes, as a few other states do as well, but it's a little different than B. abortus, and there is not a program that manages necessarily Brucella ovis in sheep like we have for Brucella in cattle. The clinical signs, the actual disease spread are a little bit different in sheep, and the transmission is not there between wildlife necessarily at a risk and in sheep in our state.
Follow-up?
Chairman Eklund, thank you, and thank you. That's very helpful, Dr. Hazel. So I'll never be able to remember the two names you just mentioned in terms of that, but it sounds like it's a larger issue as we talk about today, specifically as with this bill with cattle.
Chairman Eklund, Representative Conrad, that is correct. Cattle are the primary concern in this situation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Representative Alderman.
Dr. Hazel, did I understand right that the calf hood vaccine only stops abortion?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Ellamon, the purpose of the vaccine is to stop the abortion and to stop the spread of the disease. But the primary thing that that vaccine that we have currently does, the RP51 vaccine, is to prevent abortion. By preventing abortion, it prevents transmission of the disease.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Hazel, so a cow could still have brucellosis and not abort and not give away a big problem. Is that correct?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Alleman, that is correct. And that is the primary reason that we do testing, because you may have a cow that is bred, she does calve, but she's a carrier of the disease itself, but she will not necessarily see clinical signs. Back in the 1950s to probably the 1980s, one of the things that producers used to see is they would see abortion as the primary clinical sign for brucellosis. And due to the change in the vaccines, which occurred in the early 90s, I believe, early 90s, which switched to the current vaccine that we have now. And we don't necessarily see a, quote, abortion storm that we used to see during those time periods. Now we see more of a polyarthritis, arthritis in multiple joints, a lack of milk production, a poor doing calf, a calf that dies at 2 weeks of age. So over the years, because of our change in vaccine, we're seeing different signs from brucellosis than we used to see back in the earlier 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So could a calf just go ahead and mature normally, or is the calf going to have some problems as it grows?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Alleman, typically that calf will die by 2 weeks of age in most cases.
Okay, thank you.
On that, I'll get to you in a minute. Is that calf then a carrier as it's alive on the ground?
Chairman Eklund, those calves typically don't live long enough to even determine that status.
Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll address the good director here. First of all, could one of you discuss the tuberculosis disease a little bit with livestock? I have to admit my ignorance about this.
Dr. Hazel.
Chairman Eklund, Representative Winter, that's a very long question, and I'll try to make a very quick answer. As far as Wyoming is concerned, we haven't had TB, I don't know, before my time.
Not that started here.
We haven't had any tuberculosis in our state that we can recall the date on. Typically in today, we see it more in, and I love the dairy animals, but he's dairy in here, don't be offended, but typically we see it in dairy cattle more than we do in beef cattle. That being said, we have had issues in beef cattle in Montana and a few other states over the last 5 years or so. But being brought in, and typically we'll see the strain that is coming in, different strains that they come in from Mexico as a rule. And that's what we see it in our dairy animals more often. And we also feel that from what we're seeing in today's society, that a lot of our dairy TB is actually brought in from humans coming in from Mexico, and that transmission occurs in our dairies. The TB that we see in our beef cattle is often brought in by rodeo cattle out of Mexico, which is the reason many states have more stringent requirements on testing rodeo cattle that directly come out of Mexico or Central or South America. But it is typically not an issue that we have here in Wyoming at this time.
Follow up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So is this a death sentence for them if they get tuberculosis? And the other question would be if, does it affect horses at all?
So Chairman Eklund, Representative Winter, if the herd is diagnosed with TB, they also have to go through a testing process or a period of time. Any animal that comes up positive or suspect is removed from the herd, so it is a death sentence for those particular animals. It is not a death sentence for the entire herd, no. The test and cull process is very similar to what we do for brucellosis. Depends on the extent of the disease and the number of tests that they're required to do. USDA also has a role in that process. Horses, we typically do not see TB in horses, no.
Representative Davis.
Mr. Chair, this is a question for the bringer of the bill. You mentioned MOA or MOU. How do you envision that, or is that going to be up to the executive branch to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Davis. That would, this allows for that to take place with Director True. He could enter into an MOU, whatever, whatever acronym we want to use on it with an individual tribes or with the tribes collectively, if they were willing to do so. And it could, Mr. Chairman, I apologize, and that MOU could cover a broad variety of things. It could just be focused on a joint effort between them and maybe include Game and Fish to join with wildlife testing or expand, broaden or even be more refined, so.
Are any of you aware of changes that we need to do in the bill? It's been pretty well refined since it went through the process once, and now it's going through a second time. Okay. Well, thank you for that overview. I think the committee kind of understands if we have a positive cow anywhere or a herd that's positive, it's a huge problem. We'll never be rid of the disease as long as we've got wildlife. But we can be diligent, and our Wyoming program has been stellar in preventing the disease, and we appreciate that work. Thank you. Any more public comment? Come on up.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Travis McNevin here on behalf of Northern Arapaho Business Council. Council certainly appreciates the work of Tribal Relations Committee with Representative Larson, Senator Ellis, and also Director True in bringing this topic and this idea forward. As has been discussed, the idea here, of course, and the overall goal is to maintain Wyoming's brucellosis-free status. And also has been discussed where the disease surveillance area abuts the reservation. That doesn't mean that the risk, particularly with elk traversing in and out of the region, stops at the reservation boundary. And so the ability to work collaboratively as is laid out with the potentiality or the possibility of an MOU has been discussed, or with individual producers. And I would like to note that we have, of course, both tribal and non-tribal producers that operate within the boundaries of the reservation as well. And so this would avail themselves of that for tribal and non-tribal producers within the boundary. And so with that, ask for a favorable support for the bill, as it is very much a good neighbor type of goal and situation to manage brucellosis here in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
committee questions? I'd have one. So the non-native producers on the reservation, they probably were not eligible to participate in our state program. So that brings them in as well. Thank you. I guess I hadn't thought of that. Okay. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name's Kit Wentland. I'm Governor Gordon's special counsel and tribal relations policy advisor. I'd just like to reiterate the points that, very well laid out by Mr. McNiven, Representative Larson, Director True. The governor supports this bill. He believes it's a good effort to maintain the state's brucellosis-free status. This bacteria doesn't respect boundaries, and this just closes a gap and a blind spot that's existed and provides a tool to address it. So unless there are any other further questions, we just ask for your favorable consideration of this bill. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Wentland? Okay, thank you. Further public testimony. Good morning, Mr. Moline and Mr. Magagna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting in support of this bill for the reasons that have already been outlined. That it's good for the industry, it's good for the tribes, it's good for the producers, it's good for my members. It's a win-win situation all the way around. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would sit for any questions you or the committee may have for me.
Mr. Magagna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with Wyoming Stockgrowers Association, and I think you've had a good explanation of this bill and how it helps our industry. We're very supportive of it. We've had members in that area that is adjacent to the reservation inquire about being able to do something like this for a number of years, and so certainly is very satisfying to those people to create this opportunity. But the bigger picture is it's also a key step forward in what we're always trying to do to make sure we can maintain our ability to freely move our Wyoming livestock in and out of other states, given our brucellosis situation. So we just encourage your support for this bill.
Thank you. Any other testimony this morning? Anything online? Okay. I really appreciate the explanation. That was a great explanation on how the brucellosis works and how our program works. I appreciate that very much. Well done. We have a question here or something. Representative Davis.
Mr. Chairman, one more question for the bringer of the bill. Would you envision some unanticipated costs going forward with this, or has there's no appropriation, I guess, with it?
There is, Mr. Chairman and Representative, there's not, we didn't anticipate it would expand the requirements of the agency and as Director True pointed out with the programs that are there, they are what they are, and we have the ability to refuel the one program if it becomes low, but no, the answer is no.
I think we're ready to work on this bill. Committee, what's your pleasure? One more question?
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
If I could be so bold in asking Senator Ellis to give us her perspectives and thoughts and work on this, I would be indebted.
You didn't do a very good job of hiding. Welcome to our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not often I get to appear before House Agriculture. So, no, this is a really elegant solution that we talked about, and it's been years in the making. In our kind of toolbox as legislators, we can use carrots and sticks. And we did talk about, how do we use the stick to ensure more compliance, and we just can't. So this is a really thoughtful way to provide more of an incentive and really working cooperatively. Happy to be here to answer any questions, though, if you want to know why we have fee lands on the reservation or anything like that, but I just assume you vote on it. I think it's a good bill.
Okay. Now, sensing we might be ready to move on, move the bill by Davis, seconded by Slagle. Any changes? Looks like it's been worked long enough. We're ready to vote, Mark.
Representative Allemand.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Crago.
Aye.
Representative Davis.
Aye.
Representative Slagle.
Aye.
Representative Winter. Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
Vote is 9 aye, 0 no. Bill passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Larson. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 33. It's a little bit out of our wheelhouse, but we do have somebody who's seen it before and can help us through it. Vice Chairman Crago, whenever you're ready, just go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, I bring to you Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions, and ask for your favorable consideration this morning. This is an issue we worked through the interim and joint judiciary. The topic was actually drones. And we're going to see several bills over the course of the next few weeks regarding drones. But as we started talking about it, one of the things that came up is there's really in the hunting in Title 23, there really wasn't a very good definition of what aircraft was. There was a law that prohibited the use of aircraft for hunting or shooting or, all these different things. But we just realized that really the definition therein wasn't very good. And so that's what this bill does, is try to provide that definition. And so the pertinent language of the bill, at the bottom there of page 2, the inserted language, it just says, for the purposes of this section, aircraft means any machine or device capable of atmospheric flight, including but not limited to an airplane, helicopter, glider, I can't say the next word, or unmanned aerial vehicle. So, and that was, I believe that was language that I believe the Department, Game and Fish, helped us come up with along with LSO, and that was language that they thought would sort of clear it up and allow them to do their jobs. It's pretty simple, straightforward. I would stand for any questions that the committee may have.
Committee questions? Representative Conrad.
Chairman Eklund, thank you. I apologize in advance. Is there a denotion or clarification what a predator is? I looked through the statutes, I just couldn't find it. Is there somewhere out there that could just edify me?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we probably have somebody in the room that could tell you the exact citation, but yes, there is, and I can get you that citation. I just don't have it in front of me. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Any public testimony on this bill? Okay. Welcome. Committee, what's your pleasure?
Move a bill.
Been moved by Conrad, seconded by somebody, seconded by Banks. Any changes to the bill, discussion on the bill? Okay, we're ready to vote. Roll call, please.
Representative Allemand.
Aye.
Representative Allred.
Aye.
Representative Banks.
Aye.
Representative Conrad.
Aye.
Representative Crago. Representative Davis. Representative Slagle. Representative Winter. Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
9 ayes, 0 no. Bill passes.
Okay, thank you, committee. Good work, short work. We should have had some of these towards the end of the